Hello and welcome to JavaScript Marathon, a full week of free online courses in some of the leading web development technologies and concepts. Excited to introduce you today to Nacho Falk. He is a senior software engineer at This Labs, and he will be presenting Svelte training. A bit about who we are at This Labs proudly partners with enterprises interested in transforming their digital assets, upskilling their teams, and finding novel avenues for advanced integration. If you're interested in seeing some of the work we've done with our amazing clients, take a look at our portfolio page, this.co/portfolio. This Labs is hiring. If you're a senior software engineer, send us your info at jobs@this.co. And a couple of upcoming events in the next couple of weeks. State of Headless CMS is on July 26th. Same week on Thursday, State of Vue with Evan Yu is on July 28th. And then State of Web Components is on August 9th. And with that, I will turn it over to Nacho.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of JS Marathon. Today, we have an introduction to Svelte and SvelteKit with our very own Nacho Falk. Nacho, we're so excited to have you today.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be sharing what I've learned during these years of using Svelte and SvelteKit. Well, recently SvelteKit. So yeah, happy to share it.
Yay. Well, we're going to have a lot of fun today. Nacho showed me a little preview of what's to come, and it's going to be just an amazing presentation. We're hoping you all walk away today learning a lot more about Svelte and SvelteKit and how to build your own applications. Nacho, take it away.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, can everybody see it?
Looking good.
Okay, so hopefully today we're going to be able to answer the question of what's SvelteKit and how to use it. So first, let me give a brief introduction about myself. I'm Nacho Falk. You can find me as Flaco on any platform, and I'm a senior software engineer at This. I've been using Svelte since 2019, and recently SvelteKit. And I'm very happy to share what I've learned during these years and how to use it, and hopefully you will like it too. What are we going to be looking today? We're going to talk about what's Svelte and SvelteKit, what's the difference, and then we're going to be looking at some of the Svelte syntax because we're going to be using it on Svelte pages. Then we're going to look at some SvelteKit features and how it works. And then we'll try to build something or part of something of an application. And then we'll look at what's coming next for SvelteKit because there are more plans. It hasn't reached version 1 yet, but soon, hopefully. And yeah, let's start with it. SvelteKit, it's not a new idea. Actually, Svelte has been here for a long time, 2016. It was first version 1. There's previous versions, like there was a framework called Reactive.js developed at The Guardian. But then this evolved into Svelte. And then we have, at the end of 2017, Sapper appears, which it's another project from the Svelte team. And Sapper is a framework for building Svelte application. And it does server-side rendering. It has layouts and many of the features that SvelteKit is going to have now. It kept evolving and supporting Svelte 2 and Svelte 3. And by the end of 2020, SvelteKit was announced. And it kind of merged both projects. It doesn't merge them, but it's the evolution of Sapper. Sapper never reached version 1. It's been replaced by SvelteKit. But the point of SvelteKit and what it's the future of Svelte, it's because before you could start a Svelte project or a Sapper project, and now SvelteKit is going to be able to do all the stuff you want to do with Svelte. So it's the entry point for an application. You can do server-side rendering, static site generation, even an SPA if you want. So that's the way it's going to be delivered, Svelte now. Before we dive into SvelteKit, I like to talk about Svelte and the Svelte syntax. What is Svelte? Well, Svelte is a tool for developing fast web application, and what is important to understand about Svelte is that it's compiled. So most of the work is done at build time, and then you deliver less JavaScript, which is very important in how you write Svelte component and what do you expect to be shipping. There's no virtual DOM. The code is compiled to JavaScript that will do modifications directly to the DOM, and very precise modifications, depending on what has been changed. It has a very simple reactivity mental model. It's really easy to achieve reactivity in Svelte. And I guess this is one of the most loved features, and why Svelte has been both one of the most loved frameworks for so long. And CSS also, it's scoped by design. It won't leak into child components, so you don't have to worry much about CSS leaking. So let's understand how a Svelte component is built. There are 4 sections. The first one is the module, and the module contains information about the file. So if you export something from this script called module, you can import it. So you can understand it as the file itself, where the default export is going to be the component. And the component is built of 3 parts: the script, which is where all your JavaScript or TypeScript code goes; the template, which is a superset of HTML with extra functionality; and the style section. So you can see that it really looks like an HTML file. It's not that different. Yeah, so that's the component itself. And variables. I'm gonna go through some common concepts with other frameworks. I'm not gonna stop too much like explaining them, but you can see some similarities with other frameworks. So variables. How do you define variables? You define a variable in the script, and then you can use it in the template using curly braces. So this is very similar, I would say, to how to use variables in other frameworks. For props, and here's when interesting stuff starts happening. To define a prop, you export a variable declaration from the script in the component, not the module script, but the script that is part of the instance. And you might say that, or may think that this is strange, why an export becomes a prop. And the fact is, this script is valid JavaScript. And I'm going to repeat this maybe a lot. It must be valid JavaScript or TypeScript, but the compiler can then use it however it wants. It will convert this into an AST tree, and when it finds an export name declaration, it will do something different with it and compile it into maybe a different JavaScript that treats it as a prop. How to pass props into child? Well, you can assign it to a prop. There are shortcuts to it. If the name of the variable is the same as the prop, you can just use this shortcut with curly braces, or you can destructure an object to pass many props at once. Events. To declare an event on a component, you would use the create event dispatcher function that is provided by Svelte, that will return another function that you can call with a event name and the details of the event. How to listen for events? We will use the on directive that you can put directly on HTML elements or other components, and with the name of the event. And then you can pass a function. There's no problem with passing inline functions. They are going to be like hoisted and used efficiently. Then you have also some modification, some event modifiers, like this prevent default that's going to be run on click. You can also call prevent default inside the handler. So it's just a shortcut for doing things. And if you don't pass anything, you will just bubble up the event, because component events don't bubble. So if you want to handle the event but just pass it to the parent, you can use this shortcut. So it's the same as emitting an event with the name click in this case. Slots are a way to do content projection. I think it's called in Angular, or to render child, but at a specific position. You can have slots, default slots. You can have slots with names, or you can have slots with default values if you don't pass anything to it. And to call it or to use it, you just provide a slot property to an element or to a component. Template modifiers. This is the superset of HTML. They provide different ways to render the component. So what you can, the syntax is it's simple. You start with a hash, then continue with a colon, and end with a slash. In this case, we can optionally render the first paragraph, otherwise the second, else do something different. The modifiers provided are if else, await then catch, where you wait for a promise and render something. Otherwise, when it resolves, render something different, and if it errors, render something different. You have each to iterate on an array and render a component, each item to render each item, sorry. And you have key, which works similar to React keys, which I say will remount a component if the key changes, but instead of attaching it to an element or a component, you can attach it to a whole block. You can put a whole block under a key and it will remount if something changes. And actions, which is a way to add functionality to HTML elements. The way it works, you attach an event listener. You create a function that you will attach an event listener, and it will return a destroy method that will remove the event listener when the element is destroyed. And to use it here, you just need to put the use directive that will call the function and attach extra behavior to that element. So in this case, when we click the element, it will create a border to it with some colors. So this is very important because it allows us to do progressive enhancement to a component, and we'll be using it a lot with forms once we get to SvelteKit. Most loved feature in Svelte, reactivity. This is one of the biggest features of Svelte, I'd say, along with animations and transitions. So how does reactivity work in Svelte? Assignments are reactive. So what does it mean? So let me go to this code and go to this code. So we have this script and this template. And as you can see, we have an AST output that we can see in here where we have the 4 sections: HTML, which is the template, CSS, if you add some CSS, instance, as you can see in yellow, and a module if you define a module script. And the important thing is, here is the JS output, the JavaScript output that we'll see. And we'll see that it's very simple, and it's also very smart when it compiles. You can see that here, all my variables are defined inside the instance, except fees, because by looking at the code, you can see that it's never reassigned. So it will stay constant. So you don't need to put it inside the instance. You just define it somewhere else. And for the rest of the code, we can see that we have a function that will assign values. We're not doing nothing special here, so it's just assigning values. But this is transformed to something different. So every time in our AST output, we see or we find an assignment expression, which is the kind of node we're seeing here, the compiler knows, okay, I have to do something with this. And what's that? That it's actually invalidating the value of bus with the new result of this assignment. The result of an assignment is the new value. So this allows us to do many things, and it's very smart in a way that if you don't use this variable in the template, and I'm gonna remove it for a moment, you can see that it's not invalidating anything because it doesn't need to be reactive because it's not going to be shown in the actual component. So yeah, it's very smart on how to do things. And the other thing that is important is that we are not constrained by immutability. That is the way to signal other frameworks when to re-render or that something has changed. We only need assignments. So in this case, for example, I'm pushing a value to an array, but of course, I need to make an assignment to invalidate the value. So you usually use this syntax. And you may say, I don't want to assign foo to foo, but if you look at the end result in here, that assignment disappears. It's not there, you're just saying invalidate foo. And this first number is just the array is the index in the array of the return of the instance. You can also, of course, do the structuring, which to preserve immutability, and it's an assignment by itself. So of course, it's going to update the DOM, and you can just assign value anytime you work with objects, with arrays, with any kind of value. So important to understand, an assignment will invalidate that value and it will re-render the section of the DOM that is using it. So we can see that this is just working just with assignments. We have reactivity. Yeah. Also, we have reactive declarations, which is another way of achieving reactivity, and we'll use label statement for that. And remember, this is valid JavaScript, but it doesn't necessarily behave the same. So let me see if I can. So we have this label statement, which define a label and a statement that belongs to it, associated with it. And it's not a very used feature, so I guess that's why they decided to use it. And the way to do reactive assign statement is with reactive declarations is using a label statement, which would be with the label of a $sign. And then you can, for example, we're going to declare a new variable called push, which is equals to bus times 5. And we're going to be using it here. It's not each one, but I'm going to use push. So now, every time that bus changes, push is going to change. So we know the compiler will know that everything that is here, any variable that is declared here, is a dependency of the value of fus. So if you look at here, we can have fus here printed, and then we have, again, reactivity made easy. You have reactive statement, which is if you want to make a side effect, for example, to anything. Because these are reactive statement, you can do anything. You can put a whole block of code here. So we can console log push. And the compilers know that we need fus. Every time that fus changes, we're going to run this block. So you see the console, every time we run, we're going to get console log. So you can do, this is like your, kind of like your use effect, if you want to. Yeah, and the next one, the next way of achieving reactivity is store, which is very important too, and it's stores can be readable store, writable store, derived store, or custom store, and they are just an object that with a subscribe function that returns an unsubscribe function. That's the basic for a store. And let me open one that I have here. So in this case, I have two components using shared state. Stores are a way of sharing state. And what I'll do, I create a writable, I'm creating a writable store with an initial value. And then I can import that store in any component that will share the same state. There are two ways of using stores. One is subscribing manually and on destroy, of course, unsubscribing. This is really important. But the other way that is much easier is use auto subscription. And the way to achieve auto subscription is appending a $sign to the name of the account. This, of course, means that you cannot create variables with a $sign in their name. You just can use it. They are reserved for subscribing to stores. So in this case, I'm using a manual subscription and an auto subscription, and I can do both. Both are in sync all the time. So, okay, shared state on stores, and local state to just need assignments to have everything in sync. And there's a lot more to Svelte, but I cannot use more time. Otherwise, we won't reach SvelteKit. You have bindings. You can do two-way data bindings. You have animations. You have component life cycles like on destroy, on mount, before update, after update. You have some Svelte components that do special things. You have like a Svelte fragments, so you can build a fragment. You have context. You can set a context on a parent and bring context, get context on any child. It doesn't have. It can be. It's a way to, to set a context that can be used by any child, even if it's deeply nested. You have special tags to use on the HTML. You have this HTML that will render an HTML string. You have this debug that will run the debugger, your Chrome debugger. You have more directives like style and class, and some accessibility features that come with Svelte, like you get some warnings, some linter warnings, like, for example, if you don't put an alt in an image, it will warn you, like, don't forget to put that art and stuff like that. There are many lint rules that come with Svelte. And yeah, it's time for SvelteKit. I don't know if you have any question around Svelte that you want to ask, or if we should just go into SvelteKit.
We're ready for the kit.
Okay. So what's SvelteKit? SvelteKit is a framework for developing web applications using Svelte. It lets you control how your front end and your back end works, and gives you power to deliver applications using server-side rendering, or you can do static site generation. And if you want, you can build even an SPA with it. The default behavior is server-side rendering. It's powered by Vite, which makes it really fast during development. And it aims to use the platform as much as it can. And some of the APIs exports are just those of the platform, like fetch and URL. For example, the heart of Svelte, there is a router base on your file system, which I'd say is one of the most expressive ones I've seen so far, because it has many little things that make it so powerful. I think we can create a project now just to see the folder structure for the moment. So how to create a new SvelteKit project. You can use npm in Svelte. I'm using pnpm, so I'm just going to go with pnpm. Pnpm create Svelte. And this will ask you a few questions, like where to put your project. Do you want to use TypeScript, ESLint, Prettier, or Playwright for tests? So we're going to just do this training. You can build a demo app or a skeleton project by default. I think I'll go with the skeleton project. I'm going to use TypeScript, ESLint, Prettier, and I'm not going to install Playwright because I'm not going to be using it. I'm not going to be writing tests. So npm install, it should be fast because of thanks to pnpm. And yeah, pnpm run dev. Now it's running on localhost. So if we go to Exactly. Now we have our project running. Let's look at the folder structure. I'm gonna open this new folder, which is training. Open. Here we have our project. We can see that we have a static folder and a source folder, which contains a routes folder with the index file. So this is going to be run on the root of the website. There are more folders that we will be adding probably later, which is the lib folder for components or other stuff. We can have a params folder and a hook file. And yeah, we'll get to those in a moment. So let me go back to my presentation. Routing. So let's talk about routing. In SvelteKit, we usually define two types of routes: pages, which are Svelte components, and they usually return HTML when a request is made, and endpoints, which are just TypeScript or JavaScript file. They run only on the server, and they get a request and send a response. How are endpoints made? Endpoints are just, like I said, JavaScript or TypeScript files, and they will respond with different methods, like HTTP methods, like get or post by default. But you can enable patch or delete also. But by default, you only get and post. This can be configured in the configuration file. And this get a request and can return a status body. They can return also headers or an error if it's error, or they can also redirect. So this basically works like your server response. On the other side, pages, they usually can have they can declare a load function in the module script, which is a function that will return props if everything goes well, or you can return an error, or you can redirect if you want, or you can set cache if you need to. And these props then get passed to the component, which must set it as a prop, and then it can be used by the template. So let's look at the load function in detail. This works a little different as other frameworks, and I'm going to mention Remix in this case, because this runs on the client and on the server. So you have to be careful not to put anything sensitive in here. The load function will have an event argument, which contains information about the route, the session, and other things. You can see this stuff thing that is very interesting. And they also provide a fetch function, which is expected to be used to get some data. This is a special fetch function. Don't try to use just the browser fetch, the client fetch. Use this one inside load, because if it runs in the browser, it's gonna make an HTTP request to a route. But if it's running on the server, it will just get the file and run it from there. So it's not an extra HTTP call. And the return value from this function can be, of course, like I mentioned before, it can be some props for the component, for the page. You can have some cache information, like, because when you serve a static asset like a pre-rendered HTML page, the CDN can set some cache to that page to serve. But when you are server rendering, you don't have that, so you must set this cache in the response if you want to. More options that we can see here. You can redirect, or you can error if you want to. There are special pages that I want to talk about, and these are.
Nacho, before you go on, there's a few questions on that last slide.
Yep.
From Nacho V, He's asking, do we have adapters for different server providers like Cloudflare, AWS Lambda, Express, etc.?
We do. Well, I'm gonna reach that later, but adapters basically take your build and adapt it to your provider. So you have for Vercel, for Cloudflare, for Netlify, but by default you have this auto adapter that will try to guess the adapter based on some information. So if you run on Vercel, you get this Vercel, I don't remember the environment variable, but you can know that it's Vercel. But if you want to do special things with those providers, then you have to use the specific adapter for that provider. So in the case of Vercel, you can use it to run it on edge functions. So it has like extra properties to it or extra settings. You can put edge equals true and run it on edge functions. You have the same for Cloudflare workers or for Cloudflare pages or for Netlify. So if you want to do something that it can be done with the auto adapter, and that requires some specific settings for that environment, then you should use the one for your provider. There's also an adapter called adapter static, which will just output like a static website. Or you have another one, it's adapter node, that will actually returns a node server and also outputs like a middleware. So you can basically take that middleware file and put it in an Express server. So like app.use and the file that is output. So yeah, basically you have different outputs that you can generate with the same code.
And then there's another question from Jesse, which I think you might have answered, but Jesse asked, any way to denote it to only run server side? Jesse, can you clarify what you mean by it?
Oh, sorry, the loader, you said it runs either client or server side. Is there a way to denote the loader fetch to only ever run server side?
Yes, but it depends on what you want to achieve. We're gonna see that later, that there are more functions that you can do, like you can decide not to hydrate your page per page. So I want just to get my page and that's it. You can choose per page to pre-render it, or you can choose to do not use the router. So you can do many stuff to use it. On the other side, you can just set standalone endpoints, so you can get data from there. You can, but I think the path for the load function not to run, or at least you would not use the load function for that.
Okay.
And we'll see. We have some page endpoints too. Well, we'll get to page endpoints, but
Those were all the questions. Thank you, Nacho. They were great answers.
Awesome. I want to add something that it's a feature that has been added recently, and these are called page endpoints. And a common use case for load would be to fetch data from an endpoint, or usually with the same name as the page, and then return the body of that request as props. So there's a shortcut for that to avoid this boilerplate, and you can remove the whole load function. So you have an endpoint with this exact same name as a page, and you have a get function in that endpoint. Automatically, you get the get request and the body of the response set up as props. So that's the way that it's been added to avoid some boilerplates of the load function. Yeah, so let's go to next, layouts. Super powerful feature. We can expect to have default layouts. They can also make requests via the load function. And the rule is that they must contain at least a slot, as we see on the Svelte syntax. They must contain a slot, and that's where the content of the page is going to be put. They can be nested. So if you have, depending on your folder structure, you have one layout and a second layout inside of another folder, and then another layout inside of another folder. They will just build the layout based on all the folder structure. And a new feature that was added is name layout, which is super powerful, and you can do a lot with it. Like, you can add layouts with names, and you can make layouts inherit for another layout. You can make pages inherit for another, for some specific layouts. You can have some, you can mix and match any layout, basically, using nesting or using name layouts. We'll see what's the syntax to use them. Yeah, that's how layouts work. They work as a page. They are a Svelte component. They can load data too. And they can also add some extra information to be passed to the child component, and we'll see it in a moment too. Then we have the errors. I call it error pages because they are still Svelte component, but errors itself are components that will create an error boundary. So if you have a layout and lots of layouts, and then you have an error in a very nested route, and you have an error defined in that route, the error is going to be placed just in that section that failed. So it's not like a fail everything or render everything. So you can render basically all the layouts and all the inner stuff until you get this error boundary. So imagine you have your whole page rendering and a small section that didn't work, creating an error. So that's our errors. And naming conventions. This is the powerful router that SvelteKit has. We can have routes with a name. So this is like a static route. It's equivalent to put the name of the route, or to put a folder with an index file in it. These two are equivalent. You can also have dynamic route where the path is not known beforehand. So it will match any route with one parameter in this example, and it can return that information, of course, to the page or to the server. And we also have dynamic routes with matchers. This is something I've only seen in SvelteKit. Basically, a matcher, it will be a function that takes a path and returns a Boolean. So if it's true, it's going to match. So you can have multiple of these param with matchers. So you can have a param that equals, I don't know, a function that returns true if it's a number. So you will only match dynamic parameters that are numbers, not every parameter. So you can use this to have different behaviors depending on what it matches. Then we have this route at layout. This is about named layouts. So you have a layout named green. You can do route at green and render something with a green layout. Route at blue, same thing. And then you can have layout at layout. So you can have a green layout that inherits from a red layout and start building your layout like building blocks. Then we have this rest parameters, which means handle all the routes that have at least one parameter and get me the whole path. And the parameter that it's that you can get from this is the whole route after this rest route. So it's not just gonna be called when you have one parameter. It's gonna be called when you have any number of unknown parameters. And last, we had private modules. This is an endpoint with an underscore at the beginning. That means that this is not going to be exposed in any way. So you can call it from inside the server, but it's not going to be accessible from outside. There are rules for this. The most specific route will be the one that matches and resolves. So this rest is the less specific one, so it's the one that goes last. Matchers, as I said, are functions that take a path and return a Boolean. You can do whatever you want with it, but just have on the router, you can have a parameter and a matcher that will return, that will decide if it should be handled or not by this route. Hooks act as a middleware for requests. They run before the SvelteKit router, and you can do whatever you want with it. You can get a request and, for example, read the cookies, do something with the cookies, and then pass some information to the SvelteKit router, so it can be used by the get or the post function later. Usually used for authentication or stuff like that. Then we have the handle error handle error function that will only run if something goes wrong. So actually you have to throw, and you can, I don't know, send the error to Sentry or another provider. Then we have get session. This is also an important one because you can expose a session object to the client. So you take any information you have for the request, you can fill an object with that information, the one that can be publicly available, and return it. And that's going to be available for every page. Locals and stuff. This is the extra information you can have. Locals is for the server. So in this case, you can, and on the handle function, you can get any kind of information and add it to locals. So for example, get the cookie and do whatever you want with the cookie and just return a value to locals. And that can be used by any of the routes. It's going to be available for all the routes. And similarly, stuff is kind of that, but for the client. So if you get some info, if you load some information on a layout, you can put it in the stuff. You can put anything in the stuff. You can put some, I don't know, some values that you already fetch, and any of the pages or the inner pages can get access to that stuff and use it. So yeah, this is like extra information you can add in the server for locals or in the client for stuff. Hydrate, router, and pre-rendering. These three properties, the three constants can be exported, from the module of each page. And basically they change the behavior of a specific page. It's not like you do server-side rendering for everything, or it behaves all the pages the same, or you pre-render all the pages. So by default, hydrate, router are true, and pre-rendering is false. If you run hydrate, if you set hydrate and router to false, it actually means that there will be no JavaScript in your page. Pre-rendering, of course, will generate an HTML instead of server-side render it, and it will be served as a static asset. You can create you can mix this to do like whatever you want, but this doesn't have necessarily between. For example, it's a hydrate. It's not necessarily false or true. You can set some conditions to it. For example, you can hydrate if you're on development, because hot module replacement requires JavaScript to work. So you can set it like, okay, on development, hydrate, but on productions, do not. The router, you can set it to only use the client router if you already come from another page, instead of, if you are server rendered, don't use it. Don't use the client router. Some modules that are provided by SvelteKit are env, that provides information about, is this running on the browser or not? Are we on development mode or not? Navigation, and just putting some of the things that it provides. But we have an invalidate function that you can get a route. You can pass a URL to it, and basically it's a way to call load on demand. So if this is gonna check, okay, is the load function using this URL? If it's using it, then I need to reload. So let's say you make a change and you need a reload of the page, not the page, but if you're on the client, it's gonna re-request whatever is on load. And then you will call invalidate, and we'll see it in use when we get to forms. We also have some events like before navigation and after navigation. Then we have path that will provide the path of the assets or the base path, and stores that we know that are reactive, that can provide information about the page, the staff, or session. Those are provided as store. So these are reactive values that you can use to add some behavior. And here are the adapters, which is the last piece, which is basically take your build and adapt it to whatever output you need to Versa, like I said, like Cloudflare or Netlify, or to make a static site. And yeah, so I don't know if we should see some code. I don't know if you have any questions before we go and check some example application.
There was one question earlier on. I was holding it until probably right about now. Alan asked, are there any mature UI libraries for working with Svelte?
There are some libraries that I've seen. Haven't used any of them really, so I cannot like recommend one, but you can go into Svelte Society or other websites where they recommend like any, but the ecosystem is of course smaller than other frameworks, but I don't know, like you can have like a version of for example, React Router, there's a Svelte Router and stuff like that. So you got similar things. I think there was one that uses like, I forgot the name. What's the wool one? Well, I forgot the name, but there are libraries with different capabilities for sure. So yeah, there's a lot of space to do stuff with Svelte. Yeah. So what about looking at the code and see what we can do with it? So this is a project that's currently running. We have a route. Let me see that I have this. So it's running here. We can define an extra route, for example, about as well. I think I have to set this. So I'm going to set the Svelte extension and the preview one. So yeah, we can define like another route. About, and just close it. Okay, so now we have available a route and about route. We can also add some. This about route, as I mentioned, can be a folder with an index or the same. So we can have about folder. I move this here and I rename it to index. It's equivalent. Folders are useful when you want to set a layout. For example, I could set a layout to create a layout file. We use 2 underscores and then layout. Well, and I'm gonna use here, and I'm gonna put This is about default layout, and the rules for layouts is add a slot. So you can see here's the layout, and then we render the content. We can have name layouts. So to create a name layout, you have to add a name to it. So I can do special Svelte. Now we have a name layout with the name of special, and to use it, we use the router convention, naming convention of special, and I didn't add anything to it. So this is the about special layout. And you can see now that we're using the special layout to it. What else? We can create, I'm going to create another layout here. So you can see the kind of things we can do with name layout. This is going to be layout grade, and this is the root grade layout. So I can make this special layout inherit from this grade layout. So I'm going to do, and we should have, I didn't change the content. So we have the root grade layout, and inside we have nested this special layout. So you can mix and match layouts any way you want. It can be, I don't know, just be mindful that it can go out of hand if you start adding too much. Or you can just create all the layouts at the root. And if you request it from a page, it's gonna go all the way through the folder structure until it finds one with the same name, which I think is the way I prefer to do it. What else? We can have errors.
Nacho, could I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So you concatenated two layout layers on that one route. How did it determine which was the top layer and which was the bottom layer?
So I say index special, it's gonna find the first one starting from the sibling. So it's gonna get this one special, but special is gonna require grade. So it's gonna see if there's anything here that it can use, and it will go this way. So here's what we're doing. We're getting this one, which is the top one in the hierarchy, and using the slot to render this one.
Great, thank you. That is a great layout.
If we invert this, we would get the content before this, but yeah, that's the thing. You can, or for example, if you have a layout that is complex and you want to reset, you can create a layout that actually does nothing, like layout blank Svelte, and you just render the slot. So you can be very nested with many layouts concatenated, but then you want to reset and do nothing, you can just require it. And it will look for the closest blank layout. So it will get, I don't know why it is layout blank. Oh yeah. This is not what I wanted to do in the routes. No one. Break something up. Let me see if I broke. No. We have this blank layout, and we can have, I don't know, nested Svelte page, but I wanted to use the skip everything and just go back to blank. Blank layout. Hello. And if I go to my route now, that's nested. Yeah, we can get like a blank layout. So you can actually concatenate or just keep everything. So it will traverse the whole tree of folders until it reaches one. And if you don't use the add, it will use like the default layout, which is the one without names. It will reach the first one that it can. That's for layouts. As I mentioned, we also have errors. Error .svelte. If you want to error, we're gonna force an error now. So I don't have another layout here. Name it. So now our about page renders with the about special layout. And I'm gonna force an error here. So I'm gonna use the script context module. And I'm gonna run the load function, export the load function, and I'm gonna make it return a status of 400 and an error of it's wrong. Yeah, my errors .svelte should I'm gonna just make it there was an error. So here we have an error rendered, but you can see that we still keep the layout. So if the layout fetches some data, it will do it. You have multiple layouts, they will render all of them. But the error will be rendered in the place of the slot. So that's a way to have a boundary for your error. Routes. Here I'm getting data. So let's use some endpoint now. I'm gonna create a I don't know. I'm gonna export that foo with a default value of 5, so I can render foo. I'm gonna render foo. Yeah, I don't know how much time we have, but I think after this I will jump to the demo application to show you more stuff, because I don't want to spend much of the time just writing the code instead of seeing it in action. We have this exported foo to define a page endpoint, so the one that makes you avoid using all these boilerplate of calling load. It's use the same name as the page, and you will get a page endpoint. So export const get it's and I'm gonna be returning static, so you can would expect to return 200 with a body, and we're expecting foo for the props, so from our body. So this is foo, and it's gonna be 40. So you can see we have our about page. Made a request for the about page on the server, because this is the first render, so it's server-side render. Made a request, went to the page endpoint, called get return. And I want to show you something about hydration and how it's done. Let's see the file. So I lost it. Maybe I've lost it. Let me check. Let me. Yeah, I think I'm gonna be building it so we can take a look. Oh yeah, I know I can do. I'm gonna be requesting the page. So this is the about page. Yeah, I'm gonna build it. That's gonna be. But so the thing is, when we make a request to the server, we made the request in the server, get the data, create the page and return it. But we also, in the page itself, in the HTML, we append the result of that fetch call that we did in the server to the endpoint. So when you get the application back, sorry, the page back, then hydration will get those values from the same page. I don't know why I'm not. I'm probably doing something wrong here, but no. So here is the response. This is what I wanted to show you. We get the page, the HTML, but we also get this hydration function that will take that after it loads and it hydrates, it will take this, which is actually the response from the server. Instead of making an extra call to the server to get the data back and hydrate, it will get the data straight from here. And it seems to be very fast, just to inline this data in the HTML response itself. And yeah, I want to show you the demo application. Demo. Application. I think I'll have to do it here. Here is the demo application. Just to explain you more, maybe advanced things to do that we can do. So first of all, I'm going to show you hooks, use of hooks, usage of hooks. In this example, we're going to be reading the cookies. Remember, this runs for every request before reaching the endpoints of the SvelteKit router. So we're going to be reading from headers, the cookies, then we're going to parse the cookies. And then we get this resolve an event. So by default, this is what happens. We just resolve an event, and this means like go to the next section. But here we will be actually getting the data. And what we do is we're going to get a user and we're going to assign it to locals. And remember that locals is a way to pass things, any kind of information to the request handler. And after handler, it will go to get session, and we can get some information that can be publicly available in the client. So here we're going to get the username, we're going to expose it. And after this, it will go to any of the routes. So I have one that is private, to say so. So if you look at the request, it's going to check, oh, did we set the user on locals? If it's not, just redirect me to login. So that's a way to use sessions and make sure that you have part of your application that is not accessible for everyone. Otherwise, we can get some to-dos in here. That's what this application does. It's based on the demo app that it provides. And we have a post. We can respond to post requests. We can respond to patch requests and to delete. We had to add this to the Svelte config. You can see here method overrides. We have to enable them because by default forms work with post, and then you get data, and that's it. I want to show you the form itself, and here's where we're going to do some progressive enhancement. So this is a form. It's a regular form. It's not a form component. SvelteKit does not provide any component at the moment. There's an ongoing discussion about providing a form component, but it's not resolved yet. And by default, if there's no JavaScript, this use enhance will not exist. So you will get like an action, which is going to set where it's going to be called this post when you send it, and an input, and that's it. That's it. That will create a new, it will send a request to the post and page endpoint because it has the same name, so it's associated with it. And then we have the get, sorry, we have the load. The load function is not set because this is a page endpoint, so it's by default, it's going to do this. It's going to run the get. And the thing is, if you don't have JavaScript, every time you post, then you get the get after that. In this case, you get you refresh then the to-dos page at the same time. And if you have JavaScript enabled, you're going to do this that is kind of hidden right now. But this is an action that we saw before. That is a function that gets an element, an HTML element, and you can pass some extra field to it, and it will add some behavior to it. So by default, it will just call this. But when it's hydrated and you have your JavaScript set, it will do this, which is this is the enhance function that you're using. And the thing is gonna first run prevent default, and I'm gonna go to the bottom of this, and it's gonna add an events listener for submit. And once the element is removed, you're gonna remove the event listener on submit. And here's when it happens, all what you would expect to happen when you have JavaScript. You're gonna get the data from the form. Sorry, you're gonna get the data from the form. You're gonna call this pending callback just to pass data to the component. Then you're gonna try to fetch the same endpoint with expecting a JSON. And if the response is correct, then you're gonna clear the URL. Not clear the URL, but set up a URL without any search param or hash, and invalidate the URL as href. So if you remember when I talk about invalidate, the invalidate function that is provided by app navigation, it will run again the load function. In this case, it's implicit because we have it on the page route. It will reload it will call load again if the route is used by the load function. So in this case, in this example, we know that this is gonna get the data from the to-dos route because this is to-dos index. We know that the load function is using the to-dos route to get data. And we know that we are calling actions on to-dos. So when we get the results, we're gonna invalidate the same route to say something. So it's gonna say, okay, you just invalidated a dependency of my load function, so I need to call it again. So that's the way that we will refresh the data on the page. And in case of error, we can return an error and call another callback. And I think what is on discussion right now about the form component is that we have this action right now that can be appended to any form, and you just declare it once and you can append it on any form. Or maybe you can add a different behavior, as lightly different behavior, but usually this is what is expected, but a lightly different behavior to your form. And that will be more difficult to add if you provided a form component. And yeah, so I'm gonna run this application so we can take a look. That. So we have an about page. Some of these are pre-rendered, some of these are not. And yes, you can see here I am prefetching data. You can add some prefetch to for any link. Use regular links. And we have a to-dos application. I think I set up a database for this. So I don't know, you can add to-dos. You can see that we get this again, data JSON. It's one of the routes that is created with the page component, with the page endpoint. We can remove, we can mark as ready, and we can, of course, disable JavaScript, reload, and you can see that the page reloads because it's updating the data. No. There's a thing about post request when you don't redirect, and it's that if you don't have JavaScript or the way that the browser works, if you refresh the page after a post and you didn't redirect, you're gonna be posting one every time the same thing, so you will repeat the post. So that's why sometimes it's better to just redirect. And yeah, you can mark as ready, you can delete everything they would expect, and this was done without JavaScript at all. And yeah, that's how progressive enhancement works. But if we use JavaScript, we're gonna prevent the default behavior and do something different just by adding an action to our form. And yeah, I'm open for any questions. Before I stop this, let me go back to my slides. What's coming for SvelteKit? There's some discussion on a form component. There's also an image component on discussion, like the one on Next.js. Partial iteration is something that may come in the future. So hydrate parts of my application, not all of it, not the whole page. That's also called island architecture. Also the ability to pre-render endpoints. So if you're getting data from another source, you can pre-render it. So you just return like the result of that call. So I don't know, you can provide a JSON file that is the result of calling that endpoint. WebSocket support, it's also maybe going to happen. And yeah, I've seen some projects using WebSockets that basically use the adapter node, and then the node server has WebSockets and they utilize it like that. So there's a lot of flexibility in it. And I guess some of the discussion are around what do we provide and what do we leave to userland to do. I actually like the fact that it's an action because it's more flexible, and you still have like this default action that you can use anywhere. So yeah, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Nacho, that was a really cool presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
There aren't any active questions, but if anybody has anything, go ahead, turn on your mic, ask away. Would love to ask Nacho anything and everything about Svelte, because I think that was a pretty awesome presentation. I'm definitely going to go start using Svelte. Can't speak for the rest of everybody. Going once, going twice. Jesse doesn't like the dollar signs, Nacho. Is there any way to avoid a dollar sign?
No, that's yeah, that's like that signature at this point. You should use it if you're using stores, or you will use it if you're using reactive declarations. But if you're using just assignments, you should be fine with our dollar signs.
Fair enough. Well, if nobody has any other questions, Nacho, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for attending this special JavaScript marathon. Nacho, can you remind everybody where we can find you on the internet?
Yeah, let me go. You can find me on Twitter or any other, sorry to do this, go back to the beginning, to any social network as Flaco the Flu. Also on GitHub, name, so that's where you can find me.
Well, let's continue the conversation on Twitter for sure. Let's talk about Svelte. Let's get everybody very excited about SvelteKit. Let's go build some applications. Be sure to follow Nacho, and thank you again for coming. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.